What's the most beep up thing someone has told you about themselves after barely getting to know them?
This was a patient, middle-aged guy in short-term nursing home for a hip replacement or something. I'm trying to get to know him to figure out what kind of skills he may need to work on in order to return home safely. I ask him, "Do you cook?" He responds, "I used to, but then the cops found out."
Years ago I went on a date with a guy the first met via AOL Personals. Within 5 minutes of the date, he told me he was working on a book about speed seduction. And he was so confident he could speed seduce me, he already had a condom on ready for me. I hightailed out of there full speed. I googled him a while back and turns out he ended up self-publishing the book.
She said that if I wanted she would kill her parents so we can live at her house. I never went on a second date with her.
I was doing a service call at a house and just making small talk when the owner mentioned out of the blue that she's married to her uncle. I've been there twice, and both times they felt the need to tell me. It's kinda weird.
This happened to my wife. We had just moved into a new house and the lady next door came over to introduce herself to my wife. As she was talking, she informed my wife that her husband was mad at her because she had farted when he was going down on her.
I was a teenager working retail and there was a fidgety older woman I worked with. I was always very nice to her, but she was just a coworker at the end of the day. One day she told me about her grandpa molesting her when she was young. Her parents didn't believe her, so it continued until he died. She said she was glad he died and was happy at his funeral. I really had no clue what to say since this was out of nowhere. I just said I was really sorry it had happened. Felt really bad for her because I could tell it still really bothered her.
At work me. Hey new guy, nice to meet you. New guy, yeah you too. Check out this picture of a dude in a coffin. That's my nephew. He was killed in a drive-by last month. Me. Lemme show you where the coffee maker is.
That he broke in and beat the beep out of a guy who raped his daughter, put the guy in the hospital, with a baseball bat. I totally get why he did it, but I have no idea why he thought it was a good story to tell a new coworker.
Lady at work started telling me about land she owned in another state that is not part of America. She then started talking about how every American is a bond to the government, and your SSN is just your bond number. Wealthy people own those bonds and own you. She started naming off prices of bonds based off people's races and genders. This was all said after I simply asked her what she was doing with her long weekend coming up.
I was buying an AC at Home Depot during Black Friday sales. There were none on the shelf, so an employee was helping me get the display model. He carried it all the way to the cashier for me. I thanked him and wished him a happy holiday season. A shadow crossed his face and he looked me straight in the eye and told me he killed someone a year ago during the holidays. He ran a man over and killed him. It was ruled an accident, but he said he won't ever celebrate a holiday again because of that.
When I was around 10, I lived beside this weird family. The little girl was probably 4 or 5, always clinging to me anytime we were outside. She talked incessantly and always wanted to hang out with me, asking to come into my house. She annoyed me so badly, but she was really sweet and excited about everything. One day she tells me, "Do you ever naked wrestle with your dad?" I told her that's really weird and no, I don't even know what that means. She then tells me she and her dad and brother naked wrestle a lot. Forgive me, but I was 10, I had no idea what the beep I was being told. I still think about that to this day. The guilt eats at me. I wish I had understood more and told someone. I also had a classmate in high school I'd give rides to and from school so she wouldn't have to make her dad do it. After we graduated, I saw her working at the mall. She then told me her dad used to molest her and she was finally able to see a therapist and work through it. When someone says these things happen more often than we realize, they're not wrong. I have had years and years of training on signs of this type of abuse and it will forever break my heart and make me so angry. It's unfathomable.
I had to stay late when I was a manager as one of the female employees' parents were running late. She broke down to me about how she had been sexually abused by her best friend's father and that he had been doing it to her best friend for years. He was in jail after he did it to her, as she reported him, and sadly the daughter hated her for turning in her father as she thought it was normal behavior. She had only been working there for a few weeks at this point, and we had probably only worked together a handful of times, so I really didn't know her that well yet, but I think she just needed someone to know she was struggling with it and someone to tell her it wasn't her fault and what he did was wrong.
This guy I'd worked with for a couple days told me he had been meeting older men at a state park and having sex for money. We worked at an upscale deli.
Well, after 2 15-minute conversations with my neighbor, he wants to get a surrogate from a developing country so that his child will never be able to find their biological mother. Women in these countries are not listed on birth certificates, either surrogate or egg donor. He asked me if I'd be willing to consider surrogacy. I am currently pregnant. I am somewhat nervous about this neighbor now, because he has asked a lot of questions about our house and our baby's due date, info on the pregnancy, the plan for the birth, etc. Suffice to say, I won't be hanging out in the front garden with the kiddo when they're born. Edit. Holy beep Reddit. Apologies. I genuinely didn't realize that this interaction could be read as my neighbor being a pedophile. He's gay, guys, and getting married. Him looking into surrogacy is kind of normal. It's just very odd to bring it up to your pregnant neighbor the way that he did, and his interest in my pregnancy, baby, makes me nervous because some people who want kids can be nuts. And he's clearly shown he doesn't have much of a social behavioral filter. So yes, he'd be a terrible parent and is likely a misogynist, but he's not a pedo. I feel kind of bad I've painted him in that light. It wasn't my intention at all.
New roommate told me her current boyfriend got kicked out of college for sexual assault and was under investigation for another case of sexual assault. Wanted my opinion about it within 2 hours or meeting. Completely disregarded that my opinion was run.
Guy walks into my bar, which is down the street from a hospital. He's pretty quiet, so I'm not trying to push for a conversation. Next thing I know, he breaks down crying at the bar. I go to ask if he's okay, if I need to call him a cab, etc. He told me his teenage son had just died in the hospital down the street about an hour earlier. I had no idea what to say or how to react.
Dude got hired at my job, and within the hour, not only was he saying massively homophobic and racist beep, he also told a story. A story about how, at his second job the day before, his coworker got his hand caught in a machine. This dude absolutely delighted in telling us that. Not only did he openly laugh in his face while the dude sat there sobbing in pain with a missing hand, he also kept telling the guy that he was going to be in debt for the rest of his life because no one's going to pay for the accident. His wife is going to leave him. He was going to lose his job, etc. Basically whatever he could say to make this dude's awful day even worse. And he got glee out of it. The second he finished that story, I told him to GTFO and never come back. I was MOD, because what the actual beep.
I had a guy tell me that he and his cousin slept with the same person. Another guy telling me that when his cousin committed suicide, he wanted to drink himself to death. This was a first date. I also had some girl I went to middle school with randomly tell me over Facebook that she lost her virginity to her cousin.
Girl at the gym told me she was in an unhappy marriage and never loved her husband. As soon as the kids finished school, she was leaving him. Pretty sure I didn't even know her name.
When I used to work in construction, I was on a project with this old guy that told me he was once accused of raping his daughter, but after an investigation was conducted, it turned out it was his brother who committed the crime. Way too much information. Had another idiot showing everyone pictures on his phone of him and his stripper wife having a threesome. Can't say I miss the trades.
We were 17, first year of uni, and I had known the guy for a week or two tops. Out of beep nowhere, he tells me he had a kink for getting farted in the face by girls. I pissed myself laughing and we became good friends for a while.
I'm a female, and I met a girl at a local coffee joint. There were regulars coming there for months. So we chatted casually. But one day I was going to drive to see friends 3 hours away for a fun-filled weekend. She said it sounded fun and I don't know why, but I invited her. She said yes, and I picked her up the next day. Mind you, we were both around 19. Well, it was a 3-hour journey of hearing her life stories. She told me she was bulimic and used to hide jars of vomit under her bed from her parents so she wouldn't get in trouble. She ran away and left them there. Then I heard about an Amtrak ride she took when running away that was 3 days long. She met an older couple on there and spent the 3 days doing drugs, SND, having threesomes with them. I'm sure there was more, but those things stuck with me. She ended up getting pregnant by another guy at the coffee joint who she constantly told everyone how big his dick was. I never saw her after that. Naive 19 Yomi just sat there driving and thinking,
Holy beep me now is still thinking holy beep to be honest. I hope she's okay. 19-year-old me had no idea how to support her.
Hitchhiking through New Zealand, I got picked up by a semi-driver. Awesome guy. But an hour into the drive started unloading every bit of personal information he could. How he's cheated on his wife, screwed the company out of money, stolen items. It was like I was a priest in a confession booth. When I asked him why he told me all of that, he said it's been eating him up inside for years and telling me help get it off of his chest. He said I had no idea who he or anyone he knew was, so it felt like I was the perfect person to unload on.
Like 3 or 4 years ago, I sat down in a waiting room for an appointment and the guy next to me started talking about how he got 2 potatoes stuck inside him. Who dare give me any award? God damn it, all the notifications for awards. Please stop, ha ha ha, funny giving me rewards, please stop. There's too many notifications. No, seriously, stop. There are 2 people who gave me gold. I really think you all are trying to one-up each other while simultaneously spamming me with our awards. It's a waste, please stop for all of our sakes.
When I was in rehab, my roommate, whom was only 18, told me that she had been stripping and selling herself since she was 11 to get her dope. And that you can connect the dots of the abscess scars on her arm. She'd continually shoot up in a spot till she got an abscess and then she'd just cut it out of her arm herself. Being an ex-heroin addict myself, abscesses weren't anything new, but the fact that this tiny little 18-year-old girl, she couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds, had 9 abscess scars on just one arm, I just couldn't even wrap my head around that. You hear some of the worst beef stories ever in rehab, and I've been to 10 during my entire addiction, but this was one of the worst I had ever heard. Especially because she was so nice and had such an innocent way about her. It was heartbreaking.
Yesterday I was walking with a friend after my friend left me. He started telling me benefits of nofap and his pervertness, out of nowhere, like telling me how it had affected him and his life personally. He told me how he masturbated in a train sitting with all his friends in such a way nobody noticed. Then he goes on telling me how he asked his father for help, for which his father asked him to drink buttermilk because apparently it reduces the addiction.
I sat next to this quiet kid in my Spanish class. He was awkward and had a subtle speech impediment. One day, I tried to spark conversation with him and he told me that he considered murdering his parents.
I started working at a flower shop as a delivery driver, and on the very first day of training, the woman I was paired with proceeded to tell me all about how she was still processing her parents' deaths. Went into great detail, explained the stresses of funeral arrangements and how she had to dress her mother for the viewing because her siblings weren't able to handle it. Even told me about a text message she believes she had gotten from her mother after she passed. I did my best to be sympathetic, but we were out on a 4-hour delivery drive and she definitely took the opportunity of a captive audience to dump a serious amount of baggage. At a certain point I just didn't know what to say anymore. Edit. Her parents had passed away 3 years prior when we talked.
Oh, I have another one. Girl I worked with but didn't really know beyond her name. Told me she liked to hold her boyfriend's penis and do the aiming for him when he took a piss.
I grew up somewhere that gets very cold and dark in the winter months. In my mid-20s I worked for a medium-sized local bank that had bought an even smaller bank. Right before close, during a snowstorm, a woman came in with really old financial documents that smelled of mildew. She claimed her husband had accounts with the current bank and that she needed all the money out and close accounts. Problem was the paperwork she had was not for either of the banks described and her husband was not in the system. Then she proceeded to tell us how her husband had died after being attacked by a werewolf who was actually her husband's brother. And that her husband was also a werewolf. She claimed she needed the money for protection. After muttering a little more and randomly walking around the lobby agitated, she left. Luckily my manager was really cool and dealt with talking with her and I was a bystander, but it was still a very weird thing to hear, especially under the circumstances. Gave bad vibes for sure.
Is it weird that I read through the comments to make sure none of these were me?
Bartender for a while. I'm here to meet a man to cheat on my husband with.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more quality content every day.